things that you mentioned as being the most critical to starting a podcast, scheduling being number one, having that consistent release schedule. The only other thing that I would add on that is make sure your audio is good for whatever that first episode is, because I have listened and started with some podcasts that have bad audio and just, I can't do it. Sounds too bad.
Yeah. You're exactly right about that. And that's always the second thing that I say after schedule. My own podcasts, when I go back and listen to those first ones, like those were the best mics that you could have for podcasting. Like those were podcast specific microphones.
Were they the Yeti?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds fine, but it doesn't sound like an SM7.
Mayo experience.
Mayo experience. Mayo experience. Mayo experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, presented by Underdog Fantasy. Code Mayo at Underdog Fantasy right now is going to get you a deposit bonus of up to $250. And it helps me run the show for free all the time. So you got to do it. All right, smash the like. We're here, sub to the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast. Rating and review on Spotify. If you have like an extra 13 seconds, who knows? This is one show I've been looking forward to for a very long time. Adam Pranica, host of The Greatest Trek and The Greatest Generation and myriad other things as well, is on the line with me. It's really strange, Adam. I have listened to your podcast more than any other podcast over the past 7 years. It's
amazing.
I mean, I go on people's shows and they tell me that, like, hey, you're the reason I got into podcasting and starting a golf podcast. And, you know, they've listened to my show every week and they have for just as long. And it's weird to be on the other side of that coin. This is really exciting for me.
I'm gonna try to make you feel comfortable. We meet a lot of our listeners when we're out doing live shows around the country, and many of them are just very nervous to say hi, very nervous to shake hands or get a hug or whatever. I'm gonna make this as comfortable as possible for you.
I appreciate that. I mean, I'm in my comfort zone here right now, so maybe I can lean into it. I actually went to 2 of your guys' Toronto live shows when they came to the Great Hall.
Wow.
That was a great venue. I was like, huh.
We were able to meet because our Toronto shows are notably lit.
They are. I was lit at both those shows. And I dragged my wife to one of them.
Were you at the show in Toronto when for some reason 2 people were making out in the balcony, like in full view of everyone?
Not only that, I was sitting in the balcony.
That was you?
It was me. Yeah, it was me and my wife.
Yeah, our show has an effect on people.
I mean, that's actually a good jumping in point because there's a couple like industry things that I do want to talk to you about. But I've talked to this about some other people who do podcasts and they tour around, either around the States, going into Canada, even overseas. And I've always thought about doing it. Is it something you do for the fans? Is it a loss leader? Like, do you guys actually make money by going on tour? Because I know like you guys charge per ticket, but I can't imagine that the transportation costs, the hotel costs, getting a producer on site, coming up with the show itself, having to pre-record all your material more than likely before you go out on the road. It just seems like the logistics would make that a nightmare.
It's tons of fun and we love to do it. And it used to be a way that we earned. But up until a couple of years ago, that stopped. I mean, the economy of everything has changed over the last few years, but especially our touring economy. It got so expensive to do. We kind of got our butts kicked on the very last tour that we went out on. And part of it is like we go to bigger cities where staying in hotels is expensive, where flying into and out of is expensive. But there's really there's nothing better than doing our silly show in front of people and like hearing the feedback instantly and just having a great time with people who love the same thing that you do for like 90 minutes. And everyone's drinking and having a blast. And we're meeting a bunch of them before or after the show. Like, we're never going to stop touring. But to answer your question, like, yeah, we used to earn money and pretty good money over the course of the years that we toured. And that's kind of slowed down a little bit and turned into kind of a neutral part of our business.
I think even if it's a break even or even a slight loss, it would still be worth it just for that. I mean, the personal engagement that you get the enjoyment out of doing it. But yeah. I would imagine anyone who comes to those shows has a good time. And you basically have a listener for life at that point.
It really feels that way. We have people come to our shows year after year, and we recognize them over the years as we have our interactions and our meet and greets with them. It's great to, I mean, and that's really the thing that before we went out on tour, it doing a podcast is really isolating, right? For years, I just did it in my basement with a buddy of mine who lived across the country, and you look at your own metrics and it feels like you're generating an audience, and it kind of feels unbelievable when you're just looking at the numbers until you actually go out there and load into a venue where you've seen rock shows before and like get ready to do a show for hundreds of people who are there to see you doing the thing that you're used to doing in a basement. Like as soon as we turned the corner on our show and it became that kind of thing, it changed our lives, and it changed the way that we looked at our work.
What was the first one like? Like, how nerve-wracking was that?
Our very first show was in Seattle, in by far the smallest venue we've ever done a show, and I think 40 people came.
How many were family members?
Oh, I want to say like 4, like very few, and they were seated right up front. Like our very closest friends and family were right up front. And the smallest shows are the most nerve-wracking because you can see every face, like in perfect detail. It's like the bigger shows I feel like are easier because it's just kind of a blur in the darkness, and it's a sound that you feel instead of like all these individual expressions. So this very first show we did was for 40 people. By far the most nervous I've ever been to do a live show, but it was just intoxicating to feel like my friend and my co-host, Benjamin R. Harrison, he's like a great laugher and a generous comedy person. And like, until you do comedy in front of an audience, you really don't know if you're a funny person. And it felt great to be funny in front of folks. And that's like one of the main reasons we do the show. It's one of the reasons that we do the live show specifically.
I wonder if you had this too, that going into the first live show. So I think I'm going to start doing them, or at least on location experiences, if I'm going to go do my show on location somewhere anyway. So
Yeah.
I'm going to the President's Cup in Montreal in September. A lot of the crew is going, just different shows from across our network. Be like, hey, what if we just set up somewhere the Friday night that we're up there and just go do a live show there? Like we'll have, because I just worry that I'm going to do one of these shows and no one fucking shows up.
I promise you that's not going to happen. You're going to be surprised. People are going to show up and you're going to have a great time.
Yeah, I feel like I would have a great time. Like that really feels like a good atmosphere for me. And the difference between my show, and I mean, there's a lot of differences between our shows, but even just listening to, because when you do produce audio and video for that matter, like I can't hear, because you guys are seamless with it, where the cuts come in, like when stuff gets cut out, when stuff doesn't get cut out. Obviously, you have the transitional audio bumpers in there for, I assume, for editing purposes, just makes it very seamless, one-to-one. Here goes an ad break. Very little editing actually happens in my show because it's so time sensitive that we need to turn it over right away. Now, I did have one guest make a very inappropriate Holocaust joke one time that I did cut out of the show. Now, I felt like, you know what? That probably doesn't need to be in the show on this one. It was actually quite funny, but probably
I'm just going to draw a line through the prepared Holocaust joke I had for our show today. Just going to go ahead and not do that one.
No, I mean, if it trumps that one, and it's funny because it would be the one guest that you would never expect it to come from. Like, it just came out of left field. It was like, whoa. Like, we all just kind of sat there like, huh, can't believe he said that. And we ended up cutting that out. But normally, like, you guys do an immense amount of audio production, like even quality assurance on each episode. I can assure you that that sort of quality assurance does not happen on my show. Is it because you guys were industry professionals before starting the show that you were just so used to, like, hey, the finished product needs to be an actual finished product? You know, if we could submit a third draft and then a final draft, that is so much more important and better, especially for the listener and the quality of the show, rather than Pat hits record, Pat stops, he tops and tails and sends it to the world.
I mean, I was a professional video producer and editor for a dozen years before we started doing the podcast. So it felt not only natural, but like an obligation to edit my own work at that point. Like I'm envious of the shows that can just record live and put it out there and be done with it. It's just not in my nature to do something like that. And it's not because I'm afraid I'll tell a Holocaust joke. It's because I like I like making things as tight as possible. This was as a profession, like as a corporate video producer, especially, like part of my job was tightening up executives who would like wander around their prepared remarks and like get them down to like the core subject that they're trying to convey to their audience. So it's not like we're cutting out 20 minutes of greatest gen before it goes out. But if there's any dead air or anything, if there is a moment where one of us misspeaks or stammers, like we're gonna retake the beginning of a comment and keep going. And the show really flows. Like you've seen enough live shows to know that like it's we don't do a lot of editing of ourselves. The difference between our live shows and our edited shows, I think, are imperceptible. But we have to QA our shows. It's just like in our nature. It's why we have a producer. Like I would hate the idea of putting something out there that got past the goalie somehow that made a person feel bad or was the unintended Holocaust joke, if we're going to keep going back to that. Like you don't want to make an unforced error like that. And it's an easy way to just like take an extra hour out of a week and go like, okay, this is the show we're going to put out. And more than editing for content, it's really editing for comedy, because if we're bantering our way into a joke that's supported by a clip from a Star Trek show or a movie that we're in, or supported by other TV show that's on our mind or a movie that we love, like we're constantly thinking of ways to make the show funnier, like additively. And it's an opportunity for us to do that, that if we just recorded the show and put it out, we wouldn't have.
So when I first started doing this, like I've had this show since 2010, and then it kind of went on hiatus as I went back to college to learn how to actually both be a broadcaster and all the technical aspects. Before that, it was like, hey, here's a microphone that really sucks. I'll plug it into my laptop and talk to Blog Talk Radio, and that will record itself. So that went on hiatus. But when I ended up at the Fantasy Network in 2013, I was like, well, there's a podcast studio here. I might as well bring back my podcast. And I was doing it 3 times a week. During football season, then once a week or twice a week after that. Like it was just something extra that I was doing, which fortunately I got it in writing that I still owned the feed and that they didn't, which was just a huge win. I don't know what
good.
They did not realize what they were signing away at that point when I presented them this legal document that I had drawn up off of something I Googled. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe they'll come back and be like, yeah, not a binding contract. It's been a while.
You were fortunate to get started early too, because I mean, now that everyone has a podcast, it's hard to distinguish yourself. But if you started back then, you really have a leg up.
Well, it's funny because there's the fantasy footballers also around the same time kind of started up with me. And like we had been working together a little bit, and I had left the Fantasy Network for DraftKings in 2017. We had built up our YouTube channel, my YouTube channel, but it was theirs, to around 80,000, 100,000 subs, whatever it might have been. And we were about on pace with each other. But the moment that I left and went somewhere else, it just reset everything. And I was like, if I had just done this on my own to begin with, it would have been, I wouldn't have been, and I'm still not back up to that point just because it's so hard. Like you said, with so many people having content now that I don't know. I think my show is good, but I most definitely think the biggest thing I ever did was start one 15 years ago. That was the barrier to entry was so low. And you get these people, like the people who show up to your shows, people that have been listening for 10 years, 15 years. If you're listening to a show for 15 straight years, chances are you're probably not going anywhere unless it dramatically takes a turn.
Your metrics are so interesting to me because your subject matter is so timely. Like what you're talking about is the thing that happens right now. And our show is about, in our case, like we have a classic Star Trek show about programming that came out 20 or 30 years ago, and Star Trek shows that come out today. Like people go back in our back catalog and listen to older shows in a way that, like, does that happen for you? Are people going back in your stacks and listening to old eps, or is it always like the things that are coming out this week?
It's all, we do have one show that we do that is a comedy show that just gets mixed in, and throughout the course of the years, we've now just made it a segment during our football show every Wednesday for 20 minutes or 30 minutes of a 3-hour show. And then we kind of do a compilation of that towards the end of the year and piece each of the 18 or 19 weeks together into 4 2.5-hour shows. And we have a dedicated feed for that. If people do want to go back, but it's has nothing to do with sports, and it just has my best friend's insane takes on it. Cuss Corner. People should go subscribe to it right now if you want to laugh at someone who's completely insane that thinks that it's somehow he has the appetite and food taste of a 6-year-old and 86-year-old all at the same time. It's quite strange.
So so no hard foods,
No.
I guess.
Or really, really like very well done steak is also on that agenda.
Oh no.
Yeah, just the worst. Like people really do think it's a bit, but he's the best man at my wedding. I've been around him for a very long time. That no, this is just like
subscribed and then I unsubscribed in the course of that description.
He just you think that he's making up the takes. They're so bad, but they're just
wow.
It's unbelievable. Like there's a reason that we had to create a show around it. Like people need to hear these bad takes, if only to shame him into having better takes. But somehow it's only emboldened him to make worse takes, even though no one seems to agree with him.
That's some real edgelord stuff right there.
Very much so. But don't call him a hipster because he hates hipsters because they all have twirly mustaches and apparently ride unicycles.
Uh-huh.
You lived in Seattle. You must have saw a ton of unicycles around.
I saw more unicycles than regular bicycles there.
And they were probably just commuting between Portland
than anything else, really.
So,
you ever see those around Toronto?
No, I'm in Halifax now. I moved from Toronto. Everyone's moving. That was the thing to do right after like pandemic, middle of the pandemic. Get the fuck out of Dodge. That was the move.
Good move.
I think so. It's just we're around our families now. I got 2 little kids. Raising kids in a condo downtown in a big city versus a medium to smaller size city, but you actually have a house for less money is really the move. And the family's here.
Yeah. Yeah, good idea. You get the built-in sitters.
How do you like LA? How was that transition?
I love it. The transition was weird because my wife and I moved down here in March of 2020. Like pulled into the driveway the second week of March 2020, and then I think 3 days later, everything was shut down. It was wild. We got to know our neighbors really well, which was great because we moved away from our friends and family in Seattle, and that was part of the reason I felt a great amount of reluctance to leave. But, the pandemic really got us meeting folks for dependency, right? For social dependency. We were hanging out outside and having patio hangs and, checking up on our neighbors and stuff for months and months. And it made LA a really pleasant and hospitable place in a way I wasn't expecting. And what a place to be outside year round. If I had to do the pandemic in Seattle, I would have driven myself crazy being in the cold and the rain like that. But I understand that the conditions were really unique for arriving. And for a while, it was like a little scary to like leave everything we knew and to come to a brand new place in a situation like that. But absolutely no regrets. I love living in LA. I love eating and drinking and being able to go to Vegas almost anytime I want. It's so close. It's been great. I play golf all the time. It's big fun. Making new friends all the time too. Like a lot of folks who I went to college with moved to LA to work in the film industry, and then many of them moved back for a variety of reasons. And a lot of them told me like LA sucks and the people aren't nice and everyone's all ladder climby and stuff, but that hasn't been my experience. Most people I meet here are pretty cool.
Do you think that's because you're involved in sort of a niche and micro version of the entertainment industry? Because I was thinking about this the other day. Someone had brought up Mr. Beast to me, and I was like, I don't know who that is. And then I like went and looked at it. It's like, this is the most popular person on the internet. But I would have no reason to have ever encountered anything he had ever done. And he could be walking down the street next to me. I would have no idea who he was. But if someone was the most he is one of the more famous people in the world at this point, I would guess that 25 years ago, if Russell Crowe was walking down the street, like, that's Russell Crowe. Like everyone would just inevitably know who that is. It's almost like when I'm very excited to talk to you today. I've been listening to your podcast for ages. There's a very good chance people watching my show don't know who you are, and vice versa.
I bet. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I just feel like it's such a weird thing that maybe that's helping LA a little bit, that, the celebrity culture, the entertainment industrial complex is a bit more fractured now.
I think it's definitely that, but I also think I'm in a really good position because I don't need it. Like, I don't need a favor from an industry person the way that someone starting out might, or is trying to create a network of folks from which they can get jobs or referrals or whatever. Like, I'm just here enjoying life in LA, doing a couple of comedy podcasts and like living my life. And I know there's a huge difference in those lifestyles and the way a person can perceive Los Angeles. Like, both realities are true. You know, my friends who couldn't make it here because they felt like it was cold and backstabby or ladder climby, like those are valid observations and true, but my observations are true also, and I think it's just because of what we need from being here and what we don't need.
You had mentioned people go back through your back catalog and listen to some different things. I recently started doing that
Hmm.
because I'm not going to lie to you, I'm kind of out on Enterprise. Like I might just listen to your guys' show, and I started to like watch like the first half of season one because I had never seen it before. It's like the one Star Trek show that I had never seen. That the original, which I have
I
never
hope you
watched.
keep listening to the show because the show has been weird and funny, like much better than I thought it would be when we started out. I think we're starting to hit our stride with it.
Well, when you guys introduced the new theme song, I had like a legitimate laugh out loud for a while, and I was like, people are gonna fucking hate this or love it, and I just thought it was hilarious. But yeah,
We
I'm still
only
listening to
did,
the shows. Like I just
yeah.
is it weird because I assume that like just even within Star Trek that Enterprise is kind of regarded as the crappiest one.
I mean, its reputation definitely precedes it. And, you know, for everyone who hates that song, we only played it in full for the first episode we did about it. Like, we cut it way down going forward if it's something that drives you crazy. But I think part of it is like you can't help but like a thing a little more when its reputation is so bad. Like, it's not nearly as bad as I expected it to be. And in many ways, the worse a subject matter is or a source material is, the more fun you can have with it, the funnier you can make the experience in watching it. And I think that's been our experience so far with Star Trek Enterprise is it's so weird. Its characters are so bizarre and they're making such strange choices that we're having a lot of laughs talking about it.
Yeah, the show itself, the comedy seems like it has been ramped up, and that's what I wanted to get to. Is like, is it easier to produce comedy on something that's kind of crappier and not like doing Next Generation? Obviously,
Mhm.
I mean, I think I started watching that probably. Fuck, I would have been like 7 years old, something like that, when it came
It
on.
hit me
Or
right in that age range too.
yeah,
Like
like
it
my
was,
my mom watched it. That's why I started watching it. Like she
yeah,
was super into it. So I was like, yeah, I guess as a kid, and it's something you could show your kids because there was nothing really all that crazy about it.
totally.
But you have that nostalgia for it. There's reverence for it when people go back. That like even listening back to some of your old people must like be in for a shock when they listen to like the first two seasons of TNG on your guys' show. You guys were it was clearly a hobby for you guys back then, not a business until you had to start catering to advertisers.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because like the thing that strikes me when I listen to our old show is like I know the production value's gotten better. I know we sound better as broadcasters and as comedy people, but I don't think we've changed how we talk about things based on the size of our audience.
I,
Quite
I
quite
guess what I would say
intentionally.
that I would have noticed, and I did it as well, that when I was first starting out, and I thought, and it turned out my audience was probably bigger at the time and didn't even notice it, and that's why the show ended up becoming popular. I was a bit looser with like it sounds like even you said before, like you don't like in terms of quality assurance, you don't really want to say things that like hurt people or anything like that. And I'm kind of on the
Yeah.
same page with you now, but like 10 years ago, I didn't give a fuck. I would just fire bombs all the time. And I've changed as a person. I don't want to really do that anymore, but I used to do that at the time. I'm just thinking about the Picard Wesley runner. I just
Oh, sure.
would you guys do that again? Like if it was new today, like obviously you got to keep it in. It's fucking hilarious. But I bet you there was a ton of pushback on that.
There always has been. And it's we've always made decisions based on what has made each other laugh, me and Ben. And at the time, that was something that did. And in a way that you've described, like it's not that our audience's tastes have changed comedically. It's that we've changed about what is funny to us. Like I definitely want to make it clear that we don't do our show as a reaction to what folks are enjoying or what they want from us. Like the the guiding principle of the show has always been like, can I make Ben laugh? Can Ben make me laugh? And that's the show. And if you're down with what works for us, then you're going to be someone who enjoys what we make. And specifically when we're talking about, jokes about Picard and Wesley, like that was something that was really funny to us that long ago. And would we do a joke like that now? Probably not, because it's less funny to us. And that's the reason why. It's definitely not because we've got a lot more ears on us.
I think
It's
that's a better way
of both an audience and us.
Yeah, I think that's a better way to articulate it than kind of how I proposed it, because like my sense of humor over the past decade has completely shifted. Like the stuff I found funny when I was 38 or 28, I don't find funny at 38. That I doubt I'm going to find funny if I make it to 48. And it seems like the show has grown with you guys at the same time. Like, I remember when I had kids, I felt like my show changed a little bit just because I changed massively. I kind of over the course of 3 months of like, hey, I'm expecting to be a father. Now I am a father. Now I'm well into that my comic sensibilities are just a little bit different. And as you kind of mentioned, like my ability to be as mean as I used to be just isn't there anymore. I just don't want to be mean anymore.
I mean, there are so many podcasts about media that exist just to cap on it, like just to rip it to shreds. And they have large audiences. Like a lot of people like shows like that. But I think the most intention we have about the sort of show we want to make is that we don't want to make that kind of show. We want to make a show that makes things fun and funny, and not at the expense of things in a mean or cruel or crappy way. Like if you want that, if you got an appetite for that, like be my guest, like download another show. But it's more fun for us to not do it that way.
And I think that people do follow, because I've seen a few people come through my industry who try to capitalize on like hot take, exactly kind of what you're talking about, but in the sports realm, whatever sport that it might be. And it just feels
I think we'd be more popular if we did it like that. It sure seems that way.
Maybe, but it feels very disingenuous a lot of the time when people start doing that it takes a very, like Stephen A, for example. I don't think that Stephen A is really like how he presents himself, but he's very good at playing that character. And it's obviously a part of his personality somewhere. And he can amplify that. Like that's what the best talk show hosts, podcasters, whatever they do, some kernel of their real life amplified, turned up to 11 at that point and to go. But I see people who just, that you can tell that they don't have it in them, but they're saying it anyway. And it seems like what you kind of pointed out, like they're all very popular, like that style of either podcast, or even now it's like TikTok clips or whatever it might be. But if it's not something that you want to do, it's not going to last very long.
That the Stephen A example, or like in general, like the performative outrage quality of like a lot of hosting personalities, it just doesn't seem like personally something that I could sustain. Like like the version of me on the show that we do is pretty close to the real me, but it's like the performance me, like the comedy me. It's a little bit different from regular me. I think my wife would divorce me if that were the version that was walking around the house all the time. But like in terms of energy, I mean, hats off to you if you can be that outraged and that loud about things for that many years. But like this is a show we're going to be doing for another 10 or 15 years. This is a show we've been doing for 8 years. Like, I don't have the energy for that.
And you keep adding shows.
Yeah. We're doing a Battlestar Galactica show.
I'm excited.
That's going to start up next week. And you were talking earlier about like doing comedy about dark shows. That's definitely a challenge. That thing is serious.
It's quite serious. I had never watched it all the way through. And when you guys were doing your pilot season, I was like, yeah, it turns out you can't. Canada's weird for rights and streaming rights to things, because you would think like, oh, this is on Disney Plus in the US. It must be on Disney Plus in Canada. No, not necessarily. It could be on any streaming platform just based on the international rights with everything. So it's hard. to track things down. Battlestar Galactica, not on any streaming service in Canada.
Oh no, that's something that we should keep in mind when we're so flip about like, yeah, you can stream it right now. It's everywhere. I think I'm watching it on Amazon Prime, but I guess yeah, those rights don't cross borders.
So I ended up obtaining it through like my Google TV. Like you can buy it almost like you would like the old iTunes store and just play it off your TV. So that's what I ended up doing. But because I've been thinking about doing like I want to do some sort of not necessarily what you guys are doing, but like finding what is the best movie of all time. You know, to really SEO out that title. What is best movie rankings, best movie of all time? Just something where I can get back into watching movies. I gave up watching movies like 10 years ago, and watching movies was my favorite thing in the world. I really wanted to do a Lost.
Now is worth it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I wanted to do a Lost recap podcast. I know Lost is hitting Netflix on July 1st, I think, in the US. And just Lost is going to have a second life immediately. It is exactly the type of show that if people have heard about it, obviously, but the only thing they remember about Lost is how shitty the ending was. But the experience of watching Lost is fucking amazing. And people will get really into it again. So, you know, and now it's way too late to do something like that, but just something where I can be, maybe even it's like a once a month type thing to start that up. But how many people go back do you find and listen to the old shows like regularly, or discover a new show that you guys have done and be like, hey, I need to go back to the beginning? Do you see pretty good numbers for those?
People tell us they do it all the time, and we have a really long tail in terms of like the metrics of that. We get more downloads per week out of the back catalog than we do on a current episode, and that should be obvious because we have hundreds and hundreds of episodes in the back catalog, and just one is coming out on Monday and Friday. But yeah, it's like parasocial is the name of the relationship given to like a listener of a podcast who like really, it's kind of pejorative, right? Like folks who like really make it a part of their lives. But I have that relationship with my favorite podcasts. They become a part of my routine. They become a part of the thing that I do. Like if I'm walking my puppy Ripley, like I'm listening to a certain show when I do that. Or if I'm taking a road trip, I'm listening to a road trip podcast. Like I understand that our show becomes a part of people's lives, and I love hearing that. But it changes the feeling from the fun thing that you're doing with a buddy in a basement to like kind of a responsibility, and in a weird way, like a utility that people use to live their lives. And that part is something I never expected when I started meeting people who listen to our show, which was like, man, I really went through some stuff a couple of months ago, and your show was the only way I got through it. And that really hits. Like, it gives me chills to even say something like that about a dick and fart joke Star Trek podcast that we do. Like, it's really important to people. And if there's ever a moment where I feel like, God, here I go, another day of watching 2 episodes and recording 2 episodes, and boy, am I tired. Like, it'll get you ready to do the thing that you're doing that day really fast when you think about how important it is to so many people. Like, it's great.
Yeah, and that's something that, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned like those sorts of private emails that come in directly to you to find them, and just it always stuns me when people will say, like, yeah, been having some dark times, like this made me laugh and it got me out of it, or it got me through it until I could find something else and started to feel better about it. Like, thank you. It's like, that's not, when I hit record, that's not what I would have expected the listening audience at all to think of. But I'm very glad that that's something. And you're absolutely right. Like when, how much not fun could watching football be every single Sunday? Although it does feel like work when you go and do it.
This is something I've tried to explain to my wife a lot, and I'm not sure she'll ever understand it. But yeah, it is an effortful thing. And anytime you're doing a thing that you wouldn't ordinarily do to earn your living, like that's a job, no matter what it is.
And it's probably like when you're going through episodes, like how many times do you watch an episode? Like you watch it once, then watch it twice and make notes?
On catalog stuff, like on older Star Trek shows, I'll watch those once. On the new shows that come out on the streaming platforms, I'll watch those twice.
because it's easier, or just because it's newer characters? You might have missed something along the way.
I think contextually you understand a little better what's going on in older Star Trek, and those older Star Trek series are ones I've already watched before previously anyway. And I think there's a pace to new television programming that is so brisk. And, sometimes the dialogue is tuned down a bit where, watching with subtitles is helpful. Sometimes it takes a couple watches to really have the story and the character moments penetrate. So yeah, often I'm watching a new show twice just to make sure that I get it.
So it's funny that you mentioned like sometimes it's a bit quiet, because we edit here and like we have the big cans to put them on, and I can hear like the buzzing of the computer behind the producer. Like it picks up, and not in this studio, my bigger studio, it picks up on just our very sensitive microphones, and I can hear it when I'm doing the edit. And for a while, like I was going through Audition, like cutting that, like getting whatever waveform that was and getting that out of the actual edit, because like, man, this would piss me off if I was listening to it. But for whatever reason, I forgot to do it one day and release the show and then listen to it. And my version of quality assurance, like make sure the ads are playing, is the show firing? And I didn't hear it at all on my iPhone. And I was like, And then I went back and listened to a few old episodes where I had done it. And it actually took a lot of the depth out of the voices by like it flattened it out. And the only reason that I could hear it is because I was using these like $500 professional noise canceling headphones, which people just don't listen through. Like a lot of people just kind of, it's like the YouTube show. Like, yes, I do the video for the show along with the audio, but I think a lot of people just throw on the YouTube and just like let it play, and they're not watching the show actively. They're just listening to it. That it took me a while to figure out that I'm actually making my audio for an iPhone or for a laptop, because my Mac laptop speakers fucking suck. Like everything's shitty on them. So I can't really like do anything about that. But we also release the show on TV as well. So that gets put through a different format. And they have like certain, especially in Canada, when it comes out, they actually have certain guidelines on what the peak volume can be on a lot of this stuff. So I have to keep the mix within that. Although when I worked at my old company, I used to purposely jack up the volume, because we weren't working at a station that was like very popular or anything like that. But I thought that like if people were flicking through the channels and my levels weren't peaking at like minus 0.5 or right around even, and I was getting more up into the red, that because I always noticed it with TV shows that some of them are either way too loud or way too soft. But it would be the really loud ones where I'd stop on that channel and be like, man, that's loud. And I would have to sit there and like turn down my TV. I was like, if I just do that to my show, maybe I'll get people to stop on this channel for like 3 seconds rather than just clicking.
Monster.
Just
How
clicking
dare you?
through. It's guerrilla marketing at its finest.
Yeah, it works.
But just the mix of the show is, I don't think that's something a lot of people really think about. And the devices that people actually watch things through, and being able to tailor it to different devices is almost impossible.
It is. And like music has been mixed this way for years. I mean, producers and engineers are playing what they make, not just out of their studio monitors, but out of every speaker they can find, in order to find the optimal experience that plays across all of them. It's something that I know no podcaster I know does. I mean, I mix into my cans. I know our great producer Wendy does the same. You just do the best you can with what you've got. And I mean, I've certainly felt that way when I listened to our earliest episodes, which we edited on filmmaking software. Like we edited our first episodes on Final Cut because that was the only software we knew how to use, and we just used the audio portion of the sequences to cut our shows together. Now we're using Audition, like we should have been the whole time. But yeah, it's impossible to hit the bullseye for a podcaster, just like it's got to be impossibler for someone who makes TV and movies to nail it that way.
Yeah, because I guess you would have to just research into what are people actually watching this on, especially if it's a direct to streaming service type of show, almost like new Star Trek is, because you would have, or any new show for that matter. And it'd be even weirder for repurposing old shows that people are now exclusively consuming through a streaming service. But at least you can still kind of think like, hey, if some old is watching TNG like I would be, I'm probably watching it on my TV. I don't have my phone up like trying to watch it on the go. Sometimes maybe I'll do that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
does feel like the younger you are, the more likely you are to watch it on a tablet or a laptop or your phone, rather than
watch.
put it through the TV. And all those speakers
Yeah.
are so different.
Yeah, they really are.
And you can, I mean, I had a phone once. I couldn't figure out why the sound was bad. There was like a piece of gum stuck in the speaker. I couldn't, like, that happens too. And you're like, why is this so quiet all of a sudden? How would I know?
Yeah, I mean, you got to check our flat screen TVs for lint, because that's certainly the problem with our phones.
Yeah, so there you go. I didn't even think about checking mine for lint. I just
Yeah.
have to. I had to
Dust
put
that thing off.
I had to put a protective screen over my TV after my son threw a baseball through our old one.
Oh, buddy.
Watching it happen in real time is like, oh, you see it coming. It's like, oh no, he's like 3. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, what can you do? You just I mean, there's not many places in a house you can throw a baseball safely. I guess the lesson is don't throw inside the house.
They are not the best listeners.
Yeah.
Very impulsive, these little kids.
Well, if they were old enough, you could take the new TV out of their allowance, but maybe we're not there yet.
Do we still do? It's funny. Like, do we still do allowance? And like, I guess they'll be collecting an allowance probably 3-4 years time. Like, what do you
Is
give?
that the problem with today's kids, Pat?
Maybe, but like,
Let's
if
make
I used to get
allowance the thing again.
if I used to get like $10 a week or whatever for putting out the garbage and raking the leaves, like, the fuck are they
Yeah.
going to do with $10?
That's really true. And for a parent to be like, yeah, you mowed the lawn. Here's $150. That's You can't do that as a parent.
It's
And without that carrot, how do you get a kid to do anything? These aren't questions I have to answer. I don't have kids, but good luck.
take their phones away, I guess. I mean, not that they have phones now, and I'm firmly in the camp of they'll until they're 18, they're not having phones. They'll have phones like this time next year, I'm sure, just because it makes life so much easier, and you can track them with the phones. I think that's the part that everyone forgets about this stuff. But when you first started doing this, did you have any ideas that this would become a business and a career for you, or is this just like, this is fun?
The answer is kind of,
Okay.
because Ben had been a podcaster before. He had a couple of great and funny shows that I was a guest on a couple of times. And Ben and I hit it off so well that we were like, we should have a show. That would be fun. But here's the thing. Let's make it a show where we don't have to book guests, because that's a pain. And let's make it a show about something that we don't have to do a lot of research about, something that we know naturally, where we could just like step up to a mic, do a funny show together, put it out on the internet. And what this will be is a test for whether or not we're comedically compatible, but also compatible in the ways you need to be to do a project over a long period of time. Because doing a podcast isn't just about me and you talking into mics. It's about scheduling the show. It's about being able to manage your files in a way that they don't get lost or destroyed. It's about working collaboratively to create a thing, and more than anything else, to do that thing regularly, week in and week out, without getting tired of each other or pissed off or want to cancel the whole thing altogether. So we were like, let's do a show about Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's a thing that we love. We'll never need a guest. We'll hardly have to do research. We'll just watch an episode and then get on the mics. It'll be great. And that'll be good practice for a serious show that we want to do, where we actually like put in the work and like do real research and get guests and like really give it our all. And the craziest thing happened when we first started doing the practice show was like only a handful of episodes in, we got an Ars Technica article. We got a bunch of press right away, accidental. Like we have no idea how we got picked up or why, but our audience shot up immediately. Like in the single digit episodes, we got an audience, and that's just ridiculous for any podcast even back then. And our practice show became the real show. We started seeing these numbers and we're like, well, I guess this is it. We're working pretty well together. The show is fun and funny, and it's not taking the work that we thought the quote unquote real show would take. Once we got to that, and we made the practice show into the real thing, and that was 8 years ago.
How long was it until you joined Maximum Fun?
I remember it happening pretty early, like in the first year. And that happened because of Ben's pre-existing relationship with the network. He'd been friendly with them for a long time, and I'd been an appreciator of their shows over the years just as a fan. And Ben made the ask, and they were generous enough to offer us a spot on their network. I mean, I don't think our show shares a lot of qualities to the many other great shows that they have on the network, which is, I think, a credit to how the network runs and what the network believes in. They have a lot of different shows about a ton of different subjects, but like Star Trek comedy show is something that kind of sticks out in your catalog. And I'm grateful for them for sticking it out with us as long as they have.
Well, they need their comedy sports show soon, I think.
I think so too. God, I should pitch that again, because a sports show on the network would be great. A gambling show, I think, would be even better. That's something I definitely want to do.
Well, I mean, if you ever need, I have a Rolodex of people who gamble on things. One of the reasons I really wanted to reach out, there was an episode you guys did. I think it was during the run of Deep Space Nine, and you started talking. It was like, because Ben was so lost on it, and you were like kind of locked in. It was like a darts tournament at Quarks, and you were running through that they were betting on it and how the odds made no sense, and it was pissing you off. I was like, oh,
yeah,
Adam's one of my guys. This is exactly the type of thing that I would be pissed off about too. That
I try to talk gambling whenever I can on our shows. And anytime there's an example of gambling happening in Star Trek, that's something that I love and will want to talk about. But what makes Ben such a great co-host is he hates gambling. And you should see us in Vegas sometime, because I am soaking it up and I'm rolling craps and betting sports just as much as I can. And Ben's there to eat and drink. And we kind of moderate each other on like, well, yeah, I like to eat and drink too, but you won't find Ben gambling in Vegas. That's just a me thing when we're there.
I mean, I wonder how much like is there, because I know there's different segments of your audience. There's people who the Jim Shimodas. They're always people who work out a ton. Is there a gambling side of that too?
When I'm in Vegas for the yearly Star Trek convention, yeah. I mean, we run into them, and I'll go have hours long crap sessions with our listeners at casinos, just spur of the moment. Like it's really fun. And yeah, there is a not insignificant portion of our audience that's into that kind of thing. But I mean, I think by and large, most of our listenership are not degenerates the way I am, and I'm fine with that.
Was it specific to the two of you and you guys had this commonality that you picked Next Generation to go with as a podcast, or had you listened to like just try, like if you could kind of go back and look at it right now from like a market research perspective, be like, hey, this is actually a great audience to go after. I mean, they have conventions every single year. It's the same reason they brought back New Trek. Like there is a baked in audience for this, and viewership in 2024, hell, 2017 even. When they started releasing new Star Trek shows again, like, hey, 2 million people to watch an episode. It's a lot of people to watch an episode these days, because everyone just has these micro type of things where, it's not 70 people watching MASH or 90 million watching Seinfeld. If you can average 2 to 4 million people a week, like that's a lot, especially if it's on a streamer. Those are signups that you can get. That yes, there's this baked in audience that's always going to be there for these shows. And I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I listened to some other Star Trek podcasts before I came across yours. That's how I came across yours, because I think I was watching like Voyager or something like that at the time. And I tried out a bunch of other ones, and they were just fucking very serious and very bad.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've encountered this in sports media, like the cream rises to the top. And yeah, I mean, bless the folks that are out there doing the show that they want to do and the way they want to do it. But we were never that strategic, Pat. Like we never chose our source material thinking that, oh yeah, like the audience is big for this show that we're talking about. That'll make our audience big too. It was purely a, this is a thing that we love and love to talk about. And it's just convenience that like mid 40-year-old person is like a great demographic for selling ads on podcasts or whatever, like it's it's growing popularity, and the idea that new Star Trek would come out eventually totally surprised us. Like blindsided us even. Like we were expecting to do catalog Star Trek podcast forever until Star Trek ran out, and then that would be the end of our show, and we'd, choose a different subject to do a show on maybe. But then CBS announced that they'd start making new Star Trek, and we had to kind of scramble. Like, are we going to be having two shows now? I guess so. Like, let's do it temporarily. It seems like maybe one show is all we're going to get. And then more and more new Star Trek shows came out after, necessitating a second feed and a second show. And now we're scrambling. We're making brand new shows every week because brand new Star Trek's getting made. It's a
So
pretty great problem to have.
I would guess that it's probably, I wouldn't say easy, but easier to fill that time when there is active new Star Trek shows coming out that you can just, hey, the show came out on Thursday, Friday morning, let's drop the recap. You guys get the screeners now, right?
We get the screeners, but screeners don't account for the space between the series coming out. So I mentioned the Battlestar Galactica show that we're starting up. Like that was made in response to the idea that Star Trek Discovery is ending, and the next series has not come out yet and won't come out. Star Trek Prodigy is going to be the next show that drops on Netflix in a little bit, but we had to fill time, and we can't just gab about nothing for weeks and weeks at a time. We did that pilot season on the Greatest Trek show where we explored a bunch of first episodes of science fiction series that we enjoyed like in the 90s, and picked one to do during the gap between new Star Trek, and that just happened to be Battlestar Galactica. And that's the only reason that happened, was just we had the time to do it.
Did you feel a need to feed the beast in between seasons though? Because you mentioned this like dead time that happens and you're still producing a show every single week. Like, did you have the thought of, hey, maybe in between during the off season, essentially, we'll do once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks?
We have sometimes gone into like that low power mode of every other week, but it seems like there's enough to talk about where doing it every week is a good idea. And also, like in the back of our minds, we don't want to give anyone a reason to unsubscribe or feel like this isn't a priority for them because it's not a priority for us. It feels like a duty, to keep making shows every week. And it's not like we're making time filly BS shows where we're not putting ourselves into it. Like we're actually being mindful about like choosing a subject matter that makes sense and that we enjoy primarily. Like we've got to enjoy what we're talking about for this whole thing to work. So picking a series that works and putting it in the space between is what we've decided to do, and it's working so far.
Yeah, it's funny because you're not I have the same method of working that you just kind of brought up, and a lot of different people that I know that have been around a long time. I don't know if it's the commonality between all of us of why these shows have lasted over time, but well, I have gone on vacation. I'm not going to be Mr. I don't ever take a vacation guy. I never miss a drop for my show ever. So even if I go on vacation for 2 weeks, I have 2 weeks worth of shows prepared, even if they're not covering like the golf tournament that week. And I never take a vacation during football because that would be crazy. That's what pays the bills. But after the Super Bowl ends at the end of March or at the end of February, it's like, yeah, I've just worked for 6 straight months. I'm going to go on vacation with my wife for a little bit, but I can't have a dead spot for 2 weeks in my 100%. Show because people might unsub. And I'd be just worried that I always worked that someone was coming to take my job, whether that's a creative person that I made in my mind or not, that if you're not looking over your shoulder, I feel like your content gets really bad.
It's that. It's also that idea that we were talking about before of like people depending on your work to do their own work and live their lives. There's also like you can live a life and put out a show every week or two if you just like build up enough production runway. Like you can you can live a good life doing this. It's not like you're chained to a production schedule. You can build the runway and make it work in as close to a stress-free way as possible. Like, I get asked this a lot, and I'm sure you do too. Like, how do I start a podcast, and how do I make it popular, and how did you get your numbers and stuff? And I think one of the things I'm the most proud of is we've never missed a release. Like, we're always coming out on Monday and Friday. Never missed one, never been late. I feel great about that. And when people ask me how to do it, the very first thing I tell them is pick a schedule, stick to the schedule, never miss. And I don't think anyone takes that seriously. The folks I know who have started up podcasts who have then quit making those podcasts were the ones that were like, I don't have to do that. Like, if I drop my episode on Monday or Wednesday, or maybe it's late on Friday, like they'll get it. They'll get it once a week or whatever. I don't think that's how it works.
I don't think so
People
either.
have expectations.
Yeah, and I'm on this, like, I know when your show, like, there's something to that as well. Like, I know when I wake up on Monday mornings, your show is going to be there. When I wake up on Friday mornings, your show is going to be there. I think people feel the same way about me. Mine does shift a little bit between golf and football, but my football schedule has been the same for 11 years. Like, the same shows.
Well, I need your show to know who to bet on in the golf tournament. So like the timeliness of that is really important.
And I think that a Monday morning, because you guys used to do 2 a week, right?
We still do, yeah.
But no, but you guys used to do Did you do Greatest
We
Gen
used to
twice
do
a week?
two
Earlier?
Greatest Gen shows a week, which was insane.
Yeah, that probably. I mean, you guys could have had an extra just built in 3 years if you hadn't have done that.
Those were the days where we edited the show ourselves before we had a producer. Those were fun days.
So those were long weeks.
They were. Yeah, while I was balancing a freelance video production career. So
I know you guys have gotten into like streaming and video more recently, like over the past few years. I was actually kind of stunned that you guys, like, thinking back on it, you guys both come from video production backgrounds. You guys didn't do that along with the audio to begin with back in 2016, 2015, because I mean, you guys obviously got, as you mentioned, like single digit episodes, got a pretty big listener base right away. Imagine if those shows were also like simulcast on YouTube at the same time.
Wouldn't it have been great? Wouldn't it? If we had the foresight to do that? Here's the thing, like, this was an escape for us in the beginning. Like, when we were working freelance video, like, the very last thing I wanted to do was be camera ready.
Yeah.
And be on the opposite side of the camera after a day of work in a production environment. Like, no thanks. So yeah, it took us a long time to finally get comfortable with the idea of putting our shows on video and putting clips out, and the audience kind of demands it though now, right? Like, if you have a podcast with traction and you're not showing your face, like, that's a part of it. And another aspect of it is, like, not everyone is listening to a podcast on a podcatcher. Like, a lot of folks are listening to podcasts on YouTube in a cubicle or something. And that's something I never would have been able to predict, that there would be that many listeners and viewers experiencing the show like that.
Yeah, I found that the YouTube numbers overall have been very hard to track, because I think that the YouTube podcast has now replaced the Google podcast feed. That just one day, although I had been releasing the episodes both on YouTube for the video version and audio for the audio version, that it just popped up on my back end of YouTube one day. It's like, this is a podcast, and it had the right RRS feed that I had never put into it before. I was like, how the fuck did it know this? It must have taken it from Google and transported it over. But I think that if I wasn't uploading the video version of the podcast, it would parse the audio over onto YouTube itself and put up some sort of graphic.
Another aspect of that is that YouTube pays, like, algorithmically or subscriber wise, like it's good for business to put your show on YouTube. And that was another reason why we did it. Like, we're not a massive show. We're not making bank over there, but it's something, and it's important.
it just, and I think that people kind of forget about that, like, because people be like, oh, you do a ton of views, and they used to
Mhm.
be higher. Now they're not quite as high, but
Yeah.
you must be making bank off YouTube. It's like, not really. Like, it's
Yeah.
enough to cover some of the essential expenses that I have, which is really great. I'm
Yeah.
glad that I have that revenue coming in, but like, I couldn't live off the YouTube revenue.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just the pillars of the thing. I mean, it's the subscriber supporters, it's the merch, it's the touring, it's the YouTube, it's you need to distribute all of those things out there in order to make a living, and any one of those things isn't enough to earn a living, that's for sure.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, having the multiple streams of income, because I guess you guys have the listener support, the P1s you guys do. Was that, I mean, I haven't heard many other podcasts, if any, do that at the end
That's
of
a
a show.
newer
Like,
thing.
that is genius.
Maximum Fun has encouraged shows to do that from the start, like listener messages to other listeners, and we do two or three of those a week toward the end of our show. And yeah, that's another way that people who like our show can support it by purchasing one of those, and we have a lot of fun with those.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I bought one not too long ago. I think I was pretty drunk when I wrote it. When I listened to it, I was like, oh yeah, that didn't make any sense.
Did you get the greatest gen bump, Pat? That's
A,
what we
a
tried
little
to do.
bit. I just don't know if I'm the right show for a crossover audience. I was like, if you like, because I try to treat the subject matter the same way that you guys do with yours, although the shows are so much different. That I like sports. I like to goof about sports. I like betting. I like to goof about betting. You're not going to
Yeah.
tune into my show and be like, here are the locks of the week. And you can't lose. Like, I'm not Vegas Dave over here. Like, yeah, I lose
Yeah.
all the fucking time. Like, here's the
Yeah.
stupid reason why I want to bet on this guy. It'll be fun. Don't worry about it.
Those are the most fun bets to make.
Yeah. And I'll
The
have my
stupid
research. You know, I'll do my due diligence, but you're just going to be wrong a lot of the time. You got to get used to
Yeah.
it.
I can't wait to see what your numbers look like after this episode drops.
You know, I do. I don't know if I put greatest gen. I put your name into the titling. Titling is something that SEO has changed so much in 15 years that I'm actively bad at it now.
Here's a lock of the week, Pat. You're going to get the greatest gen bump out of this.
Yes.
Bet on it.
It's what I need. And, if I'm going to bet on it, I mean, your $2,500 appearance fee for the hour better be worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to be checking the mailbox for the next week, buddy.
Yeah, it's tough. Sending money from Canada to the US, it can get lost, you know, a few weeks later down the line. I've experienced this, getting payment as
Sure.
well. Actually, that's actually something I did want to ask you about. Like, getting the advertiser checks. You guys do have, you know, the Discord, the fan support, YouTube,
Mhm.
whatever it might be. Like, a lot of this money doesn't show up for like 2 months. Like, you do something and then you got to wait 6 to 8 weeks for the money to start rolling through. Like, I was telling you right before we came on air that I'm having a dispute with my advertisers at the same time, just due
Yeah.
to weird payment schedules. Like, have you guys gone through that? Like, did you expect that the business part would be so shitty at like constructing a fun podcast around it?
Yes, because I was a freelancer for a while, and no matter what you put on your invoice as your terms, people aren't going to care. Like, you're going to be calling them 30 days out after your net 30 terms expire, being like, what the hell? You owe me money. Like, I did work for you. And that part hasn't changed in podcasting. We're fortunate that our friends at the network handle the advertising aspect, so we're not having to get on the phone and chase things down. But yeah, there have been notable examples of companies that you wouldn't expect to just be like not being able to pay or unwilling to pay you until like a year later for ads that they purchased on your show and that you've read to your audience. It feels like a betrayal. Like, it's not just that we didn't get paid for a thing. It's like I told people that I care about your good and service. And I feel like a jerk now for doing that, you know? It's kind of twisted.
Completely. I got one. I remember like when crypto was getting bigger, like someone brought me, I think it was called like BlockFi. I was like, I don't really know a ton about this, but this sounds like they gave me like the sheet. I read through it. I was like, yeah, sounds good. I still get their notices of like bankruptcy in the mail every 3 weeks or so. But like, hey, you might be entitled to 42 cents. Like, oh, fantastic. I hope no one put their money in this.
Yeah, there is a very I'm not going to I'm gonna say allegedly a lot. Maybe that'll help legally. But yeah, there's a company that makes conventions that is very popular that bought advertisements on our show, and we had to hound them to get paid a year later
Yeah,
because they wouldn't.
you don't want to be Ned Isakoff and name names over here. That could be bad.
No, yeah, it's it's crazy. I never would have expected that.
No, yeah, it's always the companies that you would least suspect to end up going through this stuff. But it would make like
Maybe
especially
that's how
starting.
they got so big, not paying their bills.
Yeah, I mean maybe that's the part of it. It's like was it Bill Gates on The Simpsons didn't get rich by cutting checks.
That's great. Yeah,
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 once you get to a certain level of wealth or success, whatever it might be, they just have to stop paying for things. It sounds great. Got to get there.
yeah, yeah. Maybe one day.
But
Maybe.
if you were a small podcast, and I mean, you guys have the different pillars or temples even of
Mhm.
how you guys can actually make money. It's coming from this source or this source. And my show was set up very much the same way that if you were relying on this advertising and it wasn't coming in until a year later or 2 months at minimum, like it would be hard to keep up the podcast.
I mean, it is, and with our specific business model, there is some churn in the income that you get month to month. Like the listener supported model is dependent on a group of listeners liking your show enough to support it financially, and that number changes every month. So, like as a household, you make your plans with a budget and what you need to be able to afford and what you want to be able to afford, but our income's always changing based on how many people are supporting and which advertisers pay on time and not. And so there is a little bit unexpected every month about what our income is going to be, and that is going to be uncomfortable for a lot of folks in the business that we're in. I don't know. Are you purely advertiser supported?
So yes and no. Like I own separate businesses which I advertise on my show
Mhm.
as subscription based data modeling, things like Fantasy National for golf, Run the Sims for football. So I have products that I can advertise and push people through and push people to where I'm not only building up equity in that business, we're actually getting subs at the same time. But my
Right.
biggest one is like my title sponsorship now with Underdog Fantasy. Like they give me like I basically told them like I don't really I want to get we can put in a provision that if I don't get you X amount of subscribers or X amount of revenue throughout the course of the year, like you could have the ability to cancel that deal whenever you want. That's never been a problem for the show because the people are so good at like that's how they support my show by going to Underdog using code Mayo. That really does help me out a ton. But I have
Mhm.
a set limit with them. I used to have that with DraftKings too. It's like here's how much you're going to pay me per year to be the title sponsor of this show. And then the rest of it, like that gives me the runway to be like, hey, if this guy doesn't pay me for 2 months, that's okay. Because my entire budget is built around what the title sponsorship is going to be for the show that I know that that's guaranteed money coming in.
That makes sense. We need to get a title sponsor for the comedy Star Trek shows.
There you go. Maybe you should
That'd be
talk to
cool.
Underdog.
All right. All right. When we're off mic, I'm going to get a couple of phone numbers from you.
Yeah, I'll get you the deets on that. But it's how I've been able to not do a Patreon or not do a Discord, which I feel like I should have done ages ago. This is like just like a lot of things. Like when you look back on it, like, man, I really should have been at the forefront of that. That would have been a really good revenue generator for me. But then I start to think like not everything in my life needs to be a revenue generator. I would fucking hate being on Discord all the time. I hate Discord. It's the worst. I
Yeah.
text enough with people throughout the course of my day. I don't need to actively go somewhere else and feel obligated to now participate in that when I don't want to. Like I think it would be good for the show. I think it would be good for the community. I just don't want to do it.
I love all the spaces that have popped up around our show, all the little communities that have grown. But our secret is we never made them. Like me and Ben never made an online community for our show. The listeners did that. And so our Discord has thousands of folks on it. Ben and I visit from time to time and have a blast, but like we didn't create these places and we go there sometimes to just check in and see how things are going. But yeah, that would be a job in and of itself. I don't have that kind of time to stop by every social media neighborhood to like make an appearance, I think it's really cool that these places exist for people who enjoy what we do, you know, for them to talk it out. Like these places are for them. I don't think they're necessarily for us.
And I feel like sometimes, because I see a lot of people, especially in the gambling world, like here are the picks for today, here are the updated picks for today. And I understand it's more essential for that, but I'm not selling a subscription service where people get picks every single week. If I did, I would have to have that to go along with it, to keep up with, you know, imagine doing MLB content where you think a guy's pitching in the morning and then he's not pitching an hour before the show. Then you need to redo all your content. Like that is mind numbing. Like I would not want to do that, but that is
No
such
way.
an essential business model for a lot of places.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see it. I'm glad you don't have to.
But I think there's some people who live for that stuff too. And like, they're the ones who are good at it.
I mean, I'm one of those people that makes very sure right up until the moment I make a bet that things are going to be what I expect in terms of starters or players or whatever. And I'm totally crawling through those message boards trying to find whatever tips I can use for the football pools that I play. Like, I'll read anything. I'll listen to anything.
It's funny and that is now provided in the gambling industry. You can literally find, and if there's something, because for ages when I was doing like rankings for fantasy football, it would be, I would get start sit questions up to like a minute before. It's like, man, I don't know what you want me to tell you
Yeah.
a minute before the game start, but
Yeah.
all the questions are asked in a way where it's very clear that there's an answer that they want to hear. They just want someone else to confirm it with them. And now you can find that anywhere.
That's exactly right. And not only that, like you don't even have to have credibility to a certain kind of degenerate. You just have to be right. And you especially need to be right early, because if I'm just listening to you for the first time and you earn for me right away, you're my guy. I'm going to Pat Mayo for all of my picks forever after that. Like that initial dose, you know, that initial tip, that first one, if it works out, I think really matters for someone with my personality anyway. I'm like, I'm deep in the weird gambling stacks of the internet, like using whatever I can, getting whatever tips I can get from people I'm sure aren't popular, but they've worked in opportunities that I've needed them to, and that's made all the difference.
I mean, that was like rocket fuel for our show in 2016. We picked Danny Willett to win the Masters. It was the highest rated show that we did. That was our pick on the show. And then all of a sudden he wins the Masters. And people still bring that up to me today as, hey, the first time I watched the show, we hit like 100-1 winner. I was like, yeah, it's great. I don't think we've hit one since in a decade.
That's something that's so fun about sports gambling as a community and in the type of program that you make, which is like that collective feeling of like we're all in it together and we're all willing this to happen, and the feeling when it works. There's nothing like it. I mean, it's like being in Vegas during March Madness, that like that Roman Coliseum feeling of being in a sports book when it's really going off and you can feel the different sides of it rooting for one outcome or another. I love it. It's the best.
It's why I'm surprised that gambling, sports betting content, maybe it's because sports betting in the US is still a lot newer than it is in most of the world, that there would be more communities spurned up around that. Like I transitioned when I first started from fantasy football to daily fantasy to gambling. I mean, no one wants it to, if someone has a good fantasy football podcast, I want to tell you about it if I'm in the league with you.
Yeah, exactly. That's so funny. I have the same impulses. Like I've been playing a fantasy sportsbook league with my friends from college for like 15 years. And it's funny how we self-moderate our text thread with each other during the season, because like you're rooting for your friends to do well, but not that well, not better than you. And like as things are happening, you're giving them information that you had before that couldn't help them because the game's already started. And it's fun to watch those conversations unfold because like they're your buddies, but you still want to beat them. You still want to make money. There's such a tension there, you know?
Last thing before I let you get out of here, and thank you for the time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. The things that you mentioned as being the most critical to starting a podcast, scheduling being number one, having that consistent release schedule. The only other thing that I would add on that is make sure your audio is good for whatever that first episode is, because I have listened and started with some podcasts that have bad audio and just I can't do it. Sounds too bad.
Yeah. You're exactly right about that. And that's always the second thing that I say after schedule. My own podcasts, when I go back and listen to those first ones, like those were the best mics that you could have for podcasting. Like those were podcast specific microphones.
Were they the Yeti?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds fine, but it doesn't sound like an SM7.
It sure doesn't.
Like with proper compression on it and stuff. And I wish more than anything that I could like kind of go back and George Lucas those first episodes to make it a better first impression to people like you and people like me. Like I'm the same way. If you give me a tip on a podcast I should listen to and it's produced poorly and it doesn't sound right, like it does not matter how good the content is. I'll just find it unlistenable. I'm too used to professional quality.
And I have old episodes that are like that as well. And we had been using pretty good mics for a long time, but the audio now is so much better than it was when you've been doing a show for so long. Obviously things are going to change. Our video production quality, like the production quality that you're seeing me on right now at my house, is better than my studio quality was 9 years ago, just based on the lighting and cameras and the affordability of a lot of this stuff. But it's one thing to not sound as good as it does now, and it's another thing to sound bad. And I've listened to some that are like, they hurt my ears to listen to. Like your guys' show was never like that. It's weird to hear the difference between today and 2015, but it's not like I listened to the first episode and be like, oh my God, I can't listen.
That was one of the things that distinguished our show when we first started it 8 years ago, was that a lot of people were making science fiction and Star Trek podcasts at the time. Very, very few sounded the way ours did because of its professional quality. I think that made a huge difference. And it's one of the reasons why like real legitimate press outlets wrote about our show. It's because we were a professional sounding show. We weren't just folks talking into computer microphones, which is, I think, what you got a lot of the time 10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Cut for Time on X, formerly known as Twitter, as my emails tell me when I get notifications. Is there a better spot to find you guys at?
The show is on the Maximum Fun Network, so you can find our show's pages there, Greatest Generation and Greatest Trek. Greatest Generation being the show about catalog Star Trek, and Greatest Trek being about all the new stuff that's coming out, including like our Battlestar Galactica stuff. Yeah, I'm on X from time to time posting show stuff. I've kind of withdrawn from social media as a poster. I'm more of a consumer of it. Like I follow you, I follow a lot of accounts that interest me, but I'm not much of a participant anymore in those places. But like our community, our listeners have made Facebook pages. They've made a Discord at drunkshimoda.com. There's a Reddit community there with like tens of thousands of members. We're all over the place. We're everywhere that you want to find listeners of our programming.
Yeah, I'm in the Reddit sub, and I'm also just a lurker. I never participate on anything in Reddit. The only bad things can come from that, I feel like.
That's how I feel. So I'm just kind of taking a little bit of a hands-off approach. And when little fires pop up here and there, I'll be there to put them out. But most of the time, it's not like that.
Well, thanks for being on. Subscribe, download, and listen to The Greatest Generation and The Greatest Trek. If you have any interest in both, you listen to Adam talk about podcasting, you'll hear him do it. Have yourself a couple laughs. Even if you don't like Star Trek, like my wife started listening to it with me from time to time. Not a big fan of Star Trek. Find your show funny. It was like, hey, we can listen to this then. It's the one thing that we can listen to.
It is so hard to have podcast compatibility with your wife. Like that's very difficult for me too. So I'm glad our show works for you in that regard.
Yeah, we made a trade. So I listened to her and we ended up going to one of their live shows too. It's called Watch What Crappens. It's a Bravo reality TV recap show. It's fucking great. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
And like, I'll watch some of the shows with her. And your boy Rob's, I listened to his show, Vanderpump Rob's.
Yeah.
You need sometimes to get sucked into a world like with your wife of something that she's really into. You need the companion piece to go along with it to help guide you through it.
The only way to road trip is if you've got a couple of those.
That, yeah, or you're really into audiobooks, which I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
support the shows with Adam and Ben, Greatest Trek and Greatest Generation. Once again, find it on Apple, any of the podcatchers, Spotify, wherever it may be. Pat Mayo Experience, do that one as well. Smash like while you're here. And use code Mayo at Underdog Fantasy right now. Get yourself a deposit bonus of up to $250. You know, golf is still going on. NFL is coming up. You probably want to get into that. All right. Details down in the description. I'm Pat Mayo. See you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!